If you feel as though your life is just putting out fires, small stress after big stress, and you've tried things but you still feel stuck, this video is for you. So I'll start off with a quick story. I remember one night in basic training, our lead drill instructor gathered everyone together. I remember it was the entire platoon, but I forget how many guys, I just remember that it was night. Now the lead drill instructor is not somebody that you see often. Usually he only pops up if something's really wrong or if you're in big trouble. But this night, that was not the case. It turned out that he was getting us together because we had our first combat fitness test in the morning and he wanted us to be prepared. The combat fitness test, or the CFT, was something that we would do regularly once we all got to our respective units. But they're still hard, and this one was new, so our lead drill instructor figured that this one warranted a pep talk. He explained to us what it was, that it was a short but grueling physical challenge designed specifically to push guys to their limits. He let us know that we'd all live, that it would be extremely uncomfortable, and that most of us would puke. All three turned out to be accurate assessments. The combat fitness test, or the CFT, is an example of acute stress, or what I like to call simple stress. There's a clear beginning and a clear end, and usually everyone knows the desired outcome. If you're here, if you clicked on this video to break a bad cycle, acute stress or simple stress is not your problem. Your real villain, like mine was in my 20s or 30s, is a different kind of stress. One that feels like a freight train of different anxieties and worries, usually across a long time horizon, that all kind of mesh together and feel very overwhelming. This kind of stress causes us to lash out when we know better, it erodes our discipline over time even when we're motivated, and it compromises our good intentions. This kind of stress is chronic stress. This video is intended to be short and sweet with a simple goal. I want you to become aware of how chronic stress impacts you and how you can address it effectively. In the process, I'll share a couple of things that I learned from grad school and the military and working with people and hearing their stories for about 8 years. So in a minute, I'm going to share what I think is the biggest difference between simple stress and chronic stress. But first, let's jump into why managing stress not only doesn't work, but it actually keeps you stuck. The way I see stress management is actually pretty simple. I equate it to pulling a weed by the stem instead of the root. You don't have to be a gardener to know that it's going to look good for a minute, but if you didn't address the actual root, the cause, the real problem is still there. Where it's a bit more complicated is how our brains build these things called associations. If you get good at managing stress, if you make a habit out of it, your brain, your mind will subconsciously start scanning for stress to manage it. It sounds weird, but it's just like any other habit. Like around bedtime, you start looking for your toothbrush. This habit is just a little bit more sinister because we don't want to feel stressed. But if we develop that skill, if we get good at managing it, our brains will start to produce situations just for us to solve it. So it's kind of like we've conditioned our minds to pull weeds that way for so long that it becomes familiar. And your brain and mind will always default to what's familiar. I actually write about this a lot in my book. Everything exists in a bucket of contexts. These contexts stack up over time to create rhythms to our life, organization for our minds. This is why sudden stress or unexpected transitions can feel so disorienting. Not only are there practical challenges to the transition, but there's a bump in the psychological pattern you've grown accustomed to. So if you don't like your job or you have certain relationship habits that have been a certain way for so long, over-focusing on that problem, on managing it, actually reinforces that pattern, that rhythm. All right, next point. Chronic stress is like a snowball that you roll down a hill. At the top, it's pretty small, but as it rolls, it collects more snow and then it builds into a monster. What initially could be a work problem may compound into logistical stress. That logistical stress could branch out into reduced time or friction between your wife and kids. And then you're in a situation where people may say things like you're never around or you always seem preoccupied. And that way, chronic stress is a petri dish for hard feelings. And there's also more, like in any one of these situations, if you add in just some normal life stressors, like not feeling aligned with your potential, or car problems, or a water bill, or who's making dinner tonight, that small snowball isn't so small anymore. In fact, it's compounded and rolled into a set of stress responses that we call chronic stress. Here's the really big difference between chronic stress and simple stress or acute stress, like the combat fitness test that I mentioned earlier. Simple stress can be adaptive. Remember, simple stress has a beginning and it has an end. And because it has that clearly defined beginning and end, usually we can draw a pretty good lesson from that experience. We can learn a lot about ourselves, like if we need to work on public speaking or if we're not in as good a shape as we thought we were. If we reflect, we can adapt and get better for next time. So in a very real way, simple stress is actually healthy. This is why the term eustress or good stress was coined in the first place. Chronic stress, on the other hand, isn't as clear-cut, so that lesson isn't as observable. Usually, with chronic stress, we marinate in our thoughts for a while. Sometimes we may even spiral or ruminate or lash out when we don't mean to or seem preoccupied. Not only does it impact our sense of self, but it impacts the people that we love the most, and that's because of one very important reason. In chronic stress, our brain is actually changing structurally, and not for the better. When we are chronically stressed, a few things happen. We have reduced functioning in the prefrontal cortex right here, the part of the brain that does logic and reasoning. Our brains also become conditioned to scan for threats more proactively, which makes us on edge and see the world through a lens of survival. Last point, and this is a big point, our brains are less plastic. That may sound weird, but that's a reference to a word that I learned in grad school called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is our brain's ability to grow and adapt to new experiences. It's generally considered a very healthy feature of the brain. When we're chronically stressed, it stunts that natural growth process. This is part of what people mean, at least as part of what I meant when I felt this way, when they say I feel stuck. So now that we have our villain, what do we do about it? Anybody who tells you that there's a clear-cut answer is probably a liar. There's no clear-cut answer. I've worked with people in this capacity for about 8 years, and they've shared their stories with me. And because of those experiences and the patterns that I've seen, I'm a big believer in good questions. Specifically, open-ended questions paired with real intent to get real answers. Here are a few of my favorites. When do I feel most irritable on a daily basis? When do I feel most fulfilled? Where do I feel most free, most like myself? Is there alignment between how I spend my time and who I want to be? If nothing changed in 5 years, am I on track to become the person that I know I can be? What's my process for holding myself accountable, and is it effective? What is keeping my chronic stress alive, and what's complicating it? For now, just begin to see your chronic stress through a lens of awareness. And if you want to spot in any of this to figure out how your chronic stress kind of came to be, what's keeping it alive, and you want to go over your unique situation, shoot me an email. I'll leave my email address in the description below. There are also some other simple ways to interact with me. There's also a free personality guide that you can download below. Or if you just want to get a little glimpse into why you do what you do, you can also check out my book Rewired below. Either way, whatever you decide, start breaking the cycle of chronic stress and stop just putting out fires.